What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the 2 Feet on the Ground Gravity Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Chris. Thank you for choosing to tune in today. Hey, folks, you are in for a treat. I had the honor today of interviewing my lieutenant from Korea, now full bird Colonel Chris Sheffield of the United States Air Force. I don't know that I shared this before, but I got to Korea just a few weeks before September 11th, 2001. Colonel Sheffield got there just another week or so after 9/11, and watching his leadership, the leadership that he demonstrated, and the leadership of a number of other NCOs there in Korea impacted my life in significant ways. And what I loved about this interview is hearing how the lieutenant has matured over the years. He was already mature, but he has matured that much more in his leadership and his mindset and the way he's leading airmen today. Folks, you're going to get something from this, so stay tuned. But before we get into the interview, as always, I want to talk about our sponsor. Sponsor of the 2 Feet on the Ground Gravity Podcast is Service Peace Warriors. Service Peace Warriors is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to our nation's heroes. That's right, to the veterans, to our first responders that are suffering from post-traumatic stress or other service-related disabilities. They take on all the costs, folks. They don't charge the veterans anything. They take on all the costs to equip our veterans with service animals. It's an absolutely remarkable organization. If you haven't checked them out yet, please check out servicepeacewarriors.org today and learn more about them. Hey, folks, if you want to get on board, if you want to know that you're making a difference in the life of a veteran or a first responder, all you have to do is Google search Amazon Smile. That's right, Amazon Smile. You'll figure out the way to connect your Amazon account to Service Peace Warriors. And then every time you spend a little bit of money on Amazon, they're going to kick a few pennies to Service Peace Warriors. And if enough of us do this, we can sit there and equip some veterans with service animals. Folks, check them out today. Absolutely great organization. With that, folks, there's nothing more to say. I want to get over to the interview with Colonel Sheffield. Sit back and enjoy. Colonel Chris Sheffield, welcome to the 2 Feet on the Ground Gravity Podcast. Thanks for joining me here tonight.
Hey, thanks. Happy to be here. Excited to share some discussions and some memories with you tonight.
Hey, this takes us back a little bit. I know we were talking just a second offline, but 20 years ago, in fact, 20 years ago to the day, you and I were both, we're not deployed, but we were stationed at Kunsan Air Force Base in the Republic of Korea, doing our remote tour there, and that's where we first met.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it was 20 years ago, right? Until you look at my hairline and yeah, it's hard to believe it's been that long. But man, that was a fantastic, fun year. Was surrounded by some really fantastic people. It was a great opportunity. I'm glad we got to meet up way back then, and just the way that things worked out. It's unfortunate our paths never crossed again because it's such a small military service, and through the magic of social media, we've been able to stay in a little bit of contact. That's been pretty cool.
Yeah. Hey, you really weren't that that experienced, if you will. You're Air Force Academy graduate. You'd been stationed here in the States for a couple years post your graduation. And then you're in Korea just before or just shortly after 9/11.
Yeah.
And what was that experience like as a young lieutenant? I mean, you're a flight commander when you first got there. And what was that experience like being in Korea as a young Air Force officer?
Yeah. So a little context to get into that answer to that question. So my previous 2 years, I was in the Air Force about 2 years at that point when I went to Korea. So I actually was en route to Korea on 9/11. That day was the day I was PCSing to Korea. And obviously there's horrible memories from that day, right? And as luck would have it, I got stuck in Seattle for a couple of days because of the airflow getting shut down. But my previous 2 years, I was at F.D. Warren Air Force Base up in Wyoming. And if you know anything about that mission set, that base is all about intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs. And as a security forces officer, and you remember back to your security police days and security forces days, it was probably, suffice to say, kind of a boring mission because you spend 2 years, and this is my case, 2 years on the plains of Nebraska and Wyoming, guarding a weapon system that you never see, against an enemy that is not there, and not at least physically present, in a weapon system that, again, you never see it. And if you do see it, it probably means the end of times. I mean, like, frankly, right? So to go from that, then have your entire world go upside down on 9/11, right? So those of us that were in service on that day, I don't think there's a single person in uniform on that day who did not know that that meant a drastic turn in what our role in our society was, right? I mean, I don't know if we could have ever predicted that 20 years later we'd still be in Afghanistan, but the point is, I think every one of us in some way, shape, or form knew that we were at war.
Yeah.
And so then I end up in Korea, where I go from the plains of the middle of nowhere, Wyoming and Nebraska and northern Colorado, to now I'm in a total new country, new experiences. And I don't remember the distance, but like, what were we, like 150 miles from North Korea? And in a time when we didn't really know who the bad guys were and our friends were. And then all of a sudden, here I am, 24 years old, I think. I got a flight of like 50 security forces defenders like yourself, who in many cases are either older than me or at least my peers in age, right? And allegedly I'm in charge of guys who've got more time in life, more time in the Air Force, more time in service, more time in Korea than I do. And man, that was a really cool experience, because it was what I joined the Air Force to do. All of a sudden, here we are in the middle of a conflict and in a place on earth that very well, as far as we knew at the time, could have been the next front line, if you will.
Absolutely. Hey, you and the senior NCOs, the flight chiefs, did a remarkable job. And I've said this in other circles. It was very impactful for me as an E4 senior airman, because what you just described, you are the flight leader, you are the flight commander, but you have these senior NCOs in some cases that have 20, maybe even almost 30 years of experience as security forces members. And I saw you, if I could give it a term, I would say you guys did this professional dance in a very professional way, meaning I saw this mutual submission of authority versus knowledge and back and forth. And it may have been different in closed doors, but I'm telling you, as one of your airmen, it was impressive, both you and the senior NCOs. How difficult was that? Was it always easy at your different bases? Or was it sometimes challenging? Did you sometimes have some of those senior NCOs that really did step up and just do a remarkable job of mentoring you as a young officer?
Absolutely. So it's funny you mentioned that in the age gap, right? So not in Korea, but when I was in Wyoming, my very first flight chief was older than my mom. So I mean, put that in perspective. The guy who now works for me, I'm his direct supervisor, is older than my mom. And man, I thought he was going to fall out of his chair when he found out how young I was. And so there is an absolute challenge, right? You walk into a room, and that's a weird military thing, right? Officers, just by virtue of the rank on their collar or their shirt, hold a position of authority day one. And in my case, I'm standing there in front of a flight of 50 or 60 airmen and NCOs with at FE Warren with no experience. And by the time I get to Korea, at least I've got 2 years of practical experience under my belt. And my role in that regard is certainly I have to at least appear competent. Hopefully I am competent, right? Like, that's obviously preferable. And I have to, I think, and know enough to suppress, my cocky attitude, to know that these guys who are standing beside me are going to help lead me to success. And I'll tell you, throughout my career as a lieutenant, I have had senior NCOs. I'm doing what I need to do and remind me that maybe I've got some things to learn. And I've had senior NCOs prop me up, and not just senior NCOs. I'll point out, if you remember, I'm sure you remember Tech Sergeant Mo from our time in Korea together. He wasn't even a senior NCO, and he was a guy that did a phenomenal job of look like he was really truly in charge, but in having conversations, being not afraid to call me out of my BS sometimes and set me up. So I am grateful for the senior NCO experience. I'll tell you, as an Air Force officer, I think it's sometimes a rare experience, because a lot of us in the Air Force don't grow up with that strong enlisted presence, just based on the various career fields. Security forces absolutely allowed me to learn from guys who'd been doing it a long time and who were absolutely professional enough to say, to recognize what our respective roles were and help me out.
Yeah. Hey, I remember, I don't remember the exact incident. I just remember we had some type of disturbance on base. It may have been at the NCO club. It may have been something else. And one of the things I appreciated about your leadership was you weren't afraid to get into the work. Now, you never tried taking over my work. You let me do my job, and you expected me to. But there were also times, especially as a flight commander, as a flight leader, where, hey, you're an armed security forces member. There's a disturbance. It's your job to get involved on a certain level. And I don't know if you got in a foot pursuit. I can't remember exactly what it was. I just remember you coming back to the law enforcement desk, and I was like, LT, good work. And you were like, I don't know if you remember that whatsoever. I wish I remembered more details about the call. 20 years ago, kind of hard to remember, but it's a good balance, in leadership.
Yeah, it was fun. And look, and here's a big difference in how our career paths would grow up as well. Right. I haven't done that since. As an officer, I've not had the opportunity to step back into that role since I left Korea, because from an Air Force perspective, I promoted out of that role. But that was a real cool thing about being in Korea, because you were an opportunity to have some very, very busy Friday and Saturday nights sometimes. I don't remember in particular what you're talking about, but I was a betting man. I'd say the club was probably involved in some way. And and I do remember getting into a couple tussles with some folks, and it was fun stuff. So, yeah.
So what has happened post-Korea?
Cool.
Sorry about that. What has happened post-Korea? What have some of your assignments been since then?
Holy cow. So we have, I say we, because I'm married now, I've got kids, but as a family, as a military member, we have PCS'd a lot. So permanent change of station, for those who don't know what the PCS is. So since Korea, I went from there to our schoolhouse down at Lackland Air Force Base, where I was a flight chief and an instructor. From there, I went down to South America for a year in Ecuador, where we used to run some counter-drug operations, and I was chief of security at a base down there. From there, I was up at Hill Air Force Base in Utah for a couple of years, squadron commander out in Florida, at Hurlburt Field in Florida after that. Went to school out in Fort Leavenworth with the Army for a year. From there, I went to squadron commander out in South Carolina, 3-year tour in Germany. After that, on the U.S. Africa Command staff, which was a pretty cool assignment too. From Africa, I was a squadron commander down at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey for a year. From Turkey, I went to a great opportunity to go on a fellowship to Georgia Institute of Technology down in Atlanta for a year. From Georgia Tech, I got up to Minot, North Dakota, and I was working back in ICBM security again as a deputy group commander. I was fortunate enough to get selected for promotion to my current rank at Minot, which sent me out to the Pentagon for a year. And then while I was at the Pentagon, I was selected for my current job, which has now sent me to Vandenberg, California. And then throughout that, Iraq and Afghanistan tours, a couple of the deployments, things like that. So it's literally sent me all over the world, and it's moved our family quite a bit. But it's been a stupendous ride, frankly.
Yeah. Hey, that's not easy. In fact, you and I probably could list a lot of folks whose marriages can't make that work, whose families can't make that work. Yeah. What have you and your wife done to maintain perspective in life as you've been separated and as you've done all these different moves?
Yeah, that's a hard question. So it's one that unfortunately, I guess, asking me the question showed me. My wife and I, we actually knew each other before I went to Korea. We weren't married yet. So we were able to sustain a long distance boyfriend-girlfriend relationship when I was in Korea. We actually got married shortly before I left for Ecuador for a year. So we started off our marriage within about 6 weeks of being married, with a year-long separation. And really, I think part of what's really key to how that each other has our own things in addition to our marriage. So we both have individual, independent, separate lives, which allows us to I think, absorb some of those separations, because there's things that whether it's whether it was through our marriage, whether it was her hobbies or friends or skill sets that she dealt to. So one, not only just allowing those things to happen, but helping those things flourish, so the other half of the couple had things that they could fall back on. just having great trust and faith in each other, I mean, is certainly hugely important. I mean, you and I know, I mean, I can't tell you how many relationships I've seen fall apart the second there's a separation in the military. And there's a lot of trust issues that you see. There's a lot of, frankly, a lot of infidelity issues you see in the military for things like that. I just think that's something that's never once been a concern or a problem for us, or never once crossed my mind that I had something I had to worry about as a spouse while I was away. Admittedly, my wife is a little more spiritual than I am. And I know that plays a huge role on her side of that. And for me, it's staying, communicating, staying in touch. You can't be gone from each other for a year and not talk. And so nowadays, like my tour when I was in Turkey for a year was our last year-long separation. That was, from a technology perspective, I literally talked to her every single day because I had this kind of technology, right? I had Skype, or I don't think I had Zoom, but I had Skype, or I had FaceTime, or whatever. But even going back to that first year apart when we were in Korea, we still made sure, even before we were married, that there was at least a phone call every single week where we had spent some quality time on the phone together. We wrote letters, we sent emails, and then as technology evolved, the method of the communication evolved with it. But it's that constant touch points, and even if it's just something simple like the phone, say, "Hey man, I'm thinking of you this morning. I love you. I'll talk to you later," and just leave it at that.
Yeah. I hear you talking about investments there, right? I mean, that's what it is. Relationships are an investment. We have to intentionally pour time into our relationships, our spouses, our kids, other significant relationships, if we want them to be successful. If we never put any money in our IRA, guess what? When we retire, there's not going to be any money there. If we never put any time into our relationships, then how can we expect them to sustain, especially the tensions and the struggles of separation? Hey, you mentioned Sergeant Mo. I actually had him written down over here on one of my sticky notes. So I love that you brought him up. What other relationships have you had? Some senior officers over the years that have mentored you, kind of brought you under their wing, and just spoke some of those wise words into your life and into your profession?
Yeah, a couple of them. I'll tell you that. Admittedly, I this is where my investments have not been as strong. But so I've had some great senior officers out there that really took me under their wing, helped point me in the right direction. And a couple of them I stay in contact with, a couple of them I don't. But I'll tell you one that always jumps out at me, and in hindsight being 2020, is I didn't really appreciate this guy the first time this happened, the first correspondence we had, but the value was there, and I just didn't see it. And later on, as we matured our relationship, it happened to me. But he was my squadron commander at Lackland, and what I recall, my very first interaction with him was the man sitting down with me, going, "I'm looking at your records," and I was asking him for something. I don't remember what it was, but new boss, probably was poor timing on my behalf as a young captain, asking my new boss for something that was going to take me out of work for a minute. I was asking for him to send me for school or something. He's like, "Man, I look at your records and you're just nothing but average to me." I'm like, "Why am I investing in you?" And that was kind of a pretty direct feedback, right? And here I am, like, I've been winning awards, and I'm like officer of the year for this and officer of the year for that, and this guy's telling me I'm average. Like, who the hell is this guy? And then once I kind of get over myself, and he's like, "You're right. I mean, like, here I am asking this guy for something, but what have I done for him, or what have I done?" And by him, it's not about him personally, right? It's about him, the organization, him, the commander, him, the unit. And like, yeah, he was right. And it's, there's a little bit of I was looking for a lot of stuff for Chris, but I wasn't looking for a lot of stuff for my squadron and the team. And that, once I kind of got over that, I think this guy was a phenomenal mentor, and just looking at how he lived his life and the leadership that he provided to our organization was fantastic. His name is his name is Mike Kelly, Colonel Mike Kelly. He retired now from the Air Force a while ago. And I have unfortunately not maintained as good a contact with him as I probably should have. Another one, I've just been really fortunate. He was my boss when I was a squadron commander in South Carolina, a guy named Colonel Scott Curra, and he's actually still in the Air Force. He's retiring later this year. There was another guy who just, his approach to life, his demeanor to me as a young major, mid-tour major squadron commander, to let me kind of come in and just run my own thing. And with "Hey, I'm here when you need me, Chris. What do you want? So come call me, come see me. We'll talk it out." And I've been fortunate that my path has continued to cross with him. I went from South Carolina to Stuttgart, Germany, and he went to Ramstein, Germany. So we were still we were right down the street from each other. We saw each other a few times. Then I went from, after my tour in Incirlik, I went to Georgia Tech, and he was right down the street at Montgomery, Alabama at Maxwell. Which is where my in-laws live. So I was there a few times. And stay in touch with him on social media. And so just a couple of guys that just, in one case, somebody kind of grounded me and brought me back to what really mattered. In the other case, just a guy who was there to let me do my thing, but always to know he was behind me to help if I ever need anything from him. And I'm sure I could come with, a dozen more if we had enough time to talk about it here.
Hey, I don't know if you knew this. I was at Lackland as an instructor just before Korea, and then you went to Lackland right after being in Korea. Yeah. I was part of both the 342nd and the 343rd because there were different functions at the two squadrons. Yep. And as you were saying that, I remember, I think his name was Lieutenant Colonel Irwin, Michael Irwin, if I remember correctly.
Mike Irwin,
at the 342nd at the time. And I remember in this commander's call, him looking at us and saying, ladies and gentlemen, you're not that important. And at first it's kind of like, that doesn't sound like a compliment or an inspirational speech, sir. But you have to let the man finish, right? Because he was going somewhere with this. He's like, ladies and gentlemen, I need you to take your vacation. Your families are important. You're not that important. The mission is going to go on. The rest of us right here, we're going to take care of business while you're off investing in your family. And then when you get back, someone else will go. So you're not that important. Get over yourself. Take your vacations with your family. It's good for your health. And this was before we were talking about this. Right now there's a huge space for people talking about wellness, mental wellness, better ways to take care of our body. This was late 99, early 2000, probably 2000 when he's talking about this 22 years before it's even a thing. Just really appreciated leaders like that tell you what you need to hear. Even when it first hits your ears, you're like, did I just hear that right?
Right. No, he's absolutely right. And I'll tell you that, it's Colonel Arcura who mentioned Secretary Scott Arcura, that I don't know if we ever had that conversation in the same regard, but to look at him, and if I were to describe the man, he's a family man. I mean, that's one of the first things that comes to mind. He's a career warrior, right? He's, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, he has actually gotten some exceptions of policy to serve beyond his 30 years in the Air Force. He continues to serve as an active duty officer. But first and foremost, he is a family man, and he has a fantastic wife, and I think he's got 5 kids. Some are grown, and some are still at home. And he's just by his example, what Colonel Irwin is describing to you. This is exactly what Colonel Kerr was living every single day. And you're right, because we talk about it all the time, and sometimes as a lieutenant, as a captain, you didn't see it, but we talk about it all the time, man. The day I hang up my uniform, the Air Force is going to move on, and it's not going to take them but about 30 seconds to do it. They're going to shake my hand and hand me a decoration or a flag or something and say thanks. And I'm yesterday's news exactly at that point. So, the family side of this is so much more important than the job side of it.
How has that changed? I've been out. I ended up separating in 2005. And joining municipal police department. How has that conversation changed in the active duty Air Force, just in reference to wellness? Because again, it wasn't that they were neglecting it back then. There was a conversation being had, but sure. I just feel like I've seen the research, the case studies, the voices speaking out, and people telling their story, trying to decrease stigma. What have you seen as a colonel in the change?
All right. So here's where I'll throw out my official Air Force qualifying statement. Right. So I'm an active duty officer in the United States Air Force. I've been a commander. I'm a colonel. But I am here speaking Chris Sheffield's point of view. This is nothing I'm saying here is the Department of the Air Force's official stance, or as we might talk later, I'm actually assigned to a Space Force installation. It's on a Space Force point of view. This is purely my personal opinion. But I think in many ways, unfortunately, it took the military, but the Air Force specifically, to go through some tragedy to realize that we were putting our folks in the wrong place. And so it's no secret it's been the topic of conversation for probably 10 years now. It's suicide rates in the military, suicide rates among veterans. You add to that not just suicide rates, but a high risk for violent scenarios, whether it's domestic violence or veterans who conduct violent crime after their military life, for the military to really take a step back and go, hey, look, we have to figure out how to provide people balance. And you're absolutely right. That was not a conversation. I'll tell you right now, I don't remember ever having a conversation in Korea about making sure family things were on point, right? There was some conversation that probably looked like, hey, if you're screwing around over here, make sure you keep it over here because there's some UCMJ behind it if you get arrested for adultery. But that's not the right kind of conversation to have, right? Yeah. So I think, unfortunately, some very high publicity tragedy and trends forced us to take a knee and take a step back. Go, hey, what's different here? And again, as a municipal police officer, there's some similar concerns here, right? We work both work in realms where if you're the guy who can't pull the weapon tomorrow and go on shift, what good are you to the organization, right? And that stigma exists, and it exists in the military. For me, both as a security force member, military policeman, but also as a military officer, there's only one reason we exist, and that's to wage our country's wars. And if you are not in a position where you can go to a combat zone, you cannot deploy, you're not in a ready status, people are going to look at you in a certain way, right? And so that's a stigma we really have to get after. And as I've grown into a senior leader, I think I've been fortunate in the fact that I've grown into a senior leader in the same time frame that the Air Force has begun to evolve its viewpoint. And it's easy for me to be able to go out and say, hey, look, it's okay to take a knee. It's okay. As a squadron commander, I used to tell my guys, like, hey, man, it's if we're out there in a team sport, right, and you're playing injured and you're not able to pick up that key block or make that throw because you just can't do it, you're not helping me. I need you to take a knee because I need you for the game at the end of the season. I don't need you there today. So we've got someone else who can step up and take your role for a little bit, get you to where you need to be and step back in. And that notion that we would never ask someone to go to work with a blown ACL, right? We would never ask them to go out and chase down somebody with a torn knee. Why would we ask them to go do the same level of work, carrying a weapon every single day, possibly making life or death decisions, truly almost on instinct and muscle memory and training, then without even giving up the opportunity to think about it? Why would we ask them to do that with a broken brain, right? Yeah. When there's something going on inside. So I think that's been a substantial change, and I think it's a needed change. And my hope is that as we have evolved, that while the numbers have been horrific as far as suicides and some very notable public violent events that have occurred among veterans and military members, I think my hope is that the things that we can't prove, that there were lives that we were saved that we never know we saved, and we'll never know we saved because we told somebody who one day got up and said, you know what, I'm going to go talk to the chaplain today, or I'm going to go see the mental health professional today. And maybe they take a few weeks off, but to this day, they're still around for their kids or for their spouse or their mom and dad or whatever the right answer is.
Yeah. I've really been encouraged. My dad's a retired police commander, and him and I have had some very frank conversations after he retired, and hearing the history of law enforcement in my area, and then just reading a number of books that deal with post-traumatic stress injuries, and hearing the history specifically when it comes to law enforcement, and recognizing where we were in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, and where we are today. Because I hear people sometimes get frustrated. We should be doing more right now. Absolutely. 100% agree with you. However, acknowledge what we've done over the last 50 years, right? Yeah. And then let's keep the effort moving forward, because here's the deal. You might come up with a great idea and it may be good for you, but in the diversity of the human experience, that may not work for everybody. Your path to healing and to getting right in the head, my path, I was a child crime detective, and I went through a really tough battle with anxiety and depression. My head was full of too many stories of little Susies and little Tommies, and I wasn't dealing with it. I was just stuffing it down deep. And my story of what I did to heal and then to be a effective police sergeant, after that, is my story. It may not apply to other folks. So I love to hear what you guys are doing. It's encouraging. I kind of knew it. I just didn't know what your perspective is, right? Because my perspective is that the military has really moved forward just from reading the articles I read and hearing some word of mouth stories. But I like hearing the difference that you're seeing as well. Hey, let's talk about Space Force, just because I know I said this at the beginning, but I got to say it again. It's fun. Steve Carroll can only take us so far when it comes to educating me about Space Force. I need Colonel Sheffield to help me out here a little bit.
So yeah, absolutely. So let me tell you real quick about Steve Carell. Believe it or not, this is true. This is true story. If you're ever in the Pentagon, and if you've ever had a chance to be in the Pentagon's almost like a giant museum. When you're walking down the hallways, there is artwork and there are displays, and you could spend your entire day just wandering the halls of the Pentagon, looking at this just super cool stuff everywhere. And all of the service branch have their own hallway. So there's now a Space Force hallway. And my last assignment till this last summer was I was assigned to the Pentagon. The Space Force hallway was like one corridor down from where I worked. So if I was ever like in my windowless office, just needed a break, I'd go wander the halls. And Steve Carell's picture is in the Space Force hallway. So like his Space Force, it's in there. And there's some other pop culture stuff in there as well, and going back to Star Trek and some other things like that. But so United States Space Force. So United States Space Force came about. So disclaimer, I'm not in the Space Force. I'm actually in the Air Force, but I am assigned to a Space Force organization. So any Space Force folks out there who see me, please forgive my inaccuracy here. But I believe it's December of 2019, U.S. Space Force becomes its own independent branch of the United States military. So just like the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps, the Space Force is the fifth armed service, the United States military. They fall under the Department of the Air Force. So if you're familiar at all with how the Marine Corps and the Navy, they both work for the Secretary of the Navy. They both have very separate and distinct roles in fighting our nation's wars. But the Secretary of the Navy is ultimately responsible for both those services. The same happens with the Air Force. So the Secretary of the Air Force, the Space Force, excuse me. The Secretary of the Air Force is the service secretary who's responsible to organize, train, and equip both the United States Air Force and the United States Space Force. And as we came into the latter half of the 20 teens, 2011 to 2020, it almost comes up as a joke when you talk about it. It's on late night talk shows, and Steve Carell's got his TV show, right? But there is legitimately a national security interest in having an independent military force that conducts operations in space. So no, it's not going to be X-wing fighters versus TIE fighters, at least not for any known current technologies, right? We're not going to probably put soldiers on the moon to go fight over the moon base with China, like in the Space Force, right? But there are every single day in our nation, in the importance of the security of our nation, there are strategic military goals and objectives that rely heavily on our ability to operate freely in space and defend our assets in space. And I'll give you just one example. A lot of people don't realize this, but if you've got some time and you're curious and you own any kind of debit card, credit card, and I'd be challenged to find an American who probably doesn't, right? The international banking systems that allow you to swipe a credit card today in Washington State or anywhere in the world and have it register with your bank in real time and actually match with the money, that rides on the timing system set on our constellation GPS satellites. And if your GPS satellite system goes offline, you could effectively lose your ability to do bank. That's a pretty substantial concern when you consider the extremely limited number of GPS satellites that exist out there, right? And then you consider the fact that in anywhere out in the news today, you can pull an open source news and Google it, and you can find that some of our adversary countries out there have the ability to go into orbit today, target a operating satellite and take it out of commission, and there's virtually no way to defend against it. Many things that we do that rely that involve communications around the globe, weather patterns, precision navigation, and I can go on and on and on. Comes on the backs of a satellite system or a ground tracking station around the globe that is in some way, shape, or form possibly ran by the United States military. Some of our adversaries have actually already gone to independent Space Force before we did, and reorganized their forces to do that. And so the Space Force, while it gets a lot of good punchlines, right, there's an absolute vital need for what they do, and whether folks recognize it or not, there are folks operating the space domain right now as we speak who are defending our country. So what they did to your point, so what they did is they took primarily initially to start the U.S. Air Force's what was known as Air Force Space Command. So the Air Force is subdivided into what we call major commands. Air Force Space Command was the command that managed the Air Force's portion of the U.S. military space capability. And our Air Force Space Command, almost part and parcel, just the whole thing became the United States Space Force. In the time since that happened in late 2019, then we have followed on with some aspects of other military service space capabilities have rolled into Space Force, and there's more planning. But U.S. Space Force is alive and well. It exists. The Chief of Space Operations, General Raymond, sits at the same table as all the other chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They have their own operating budget. They have their own strategies, their own doctrine. So I happen to sit at a space launch delta where we conduct the business of launching rockets into space to put national security and other payloads into orbit. And in my role in that organization is what in the rest of the Air Force you might know as a mission support group commander or a support group commander, if you remember those days. Kind of the city manager. You get Department of Public Works, you get Fire and Emergency Services, Child and Youth Services, Parks and Recreation, the HR department for the city, if you will. So a lot of the Space Force is very lean and very operationally focused. So what you'll find there, again, this Air Force Space Force relationship, the Space Force only, I should rephrase this, I'm sorry. Those are assigned actually wearing U.S. Space Force name tapes on their shirts. They're a very small subset of what the Space Force is. Most of their operational support stuff will remain Air Force because they're very much operationally focused, and the Air Force is going to retain their responsibility to run the installations, protect the installations, sustain the installations, et cetera. So I don't know what else I can tell you about Space Force. I'm happy to answer questions, but I suspect nobody wants to hear a 45-minute speech on it.
I thought that was great because I didn't realize that. I really thought they had splintered away, and I figured that there was now security forces members that were wearing Air Force, Space Force tabs, but that makes total sense. Why are we going to duplicate jobs and training centers and all this? Exactly. We're just going to increase money that we really don't need to be spending out. Hey, one of the things I loved about trolling, if I can call it that, your Facebook account was it looks like you and your wife like to have fun. You guys dressing up for different parties. I don't know if it was a Halloween party, but probably, she was Rosie the Riveter, and you're a young, I don't know if it was an airman or a young Army soldier, and it just looks, I don't know, how do you guys infuse fun into your marriage and into your family life?
Well, so I think the kids have a lot to do with it, right? So we've got 3 little girls, 11, 8, and 7, right? So if you've had kids yourself, and young of you all girls as well, I think actually. So that at certain ages, like the age they are, you can't do things that aren't fun, right? Because it just doesn't work as a family, right? You can't. Every time I take my kids anywhere near something that sounds like a museum, it's just this is the worst. I'm so bored. So you got to do things that are fun and entertaining, and so just look for opportunities. And I'll tell you, I'm lucky in the regard that my wife's a good driving factor behind that. So if there's a costume party to be had, or there's some cool event in the local neighborhood, and then the other part about that, we're lucky in the regard that as a military officer and in my case a senior officer, we live in fairly sequestered neighborhoods, if you will. My current position requires me to live on the installation, so I live with all the other colonels on the base, and just because, and you remember, nobody wants to be around a colonel, right? Like you see when you're in the military, right? You see a colonel coming, you're gonna do anything you can to get out of that room, right? This still happens, and nobody wants to be around us, so we have to hang out with each other. So you kind of get some insular little community that allows that, but it's all about you just got to continue to find ways to be creative and entertain yourselves, because there's so many things, these things, right, will take up all of your time.
Darn cell phones. Yeah.
I have 2, in fact. So got to carry the work phone and the personal phone. And then I'm talking to you on a tablet, and every one of my kids has a tablet. So, you've got to find ways to break away from that. And the other thing we do as a family is, if you've on your Facebook, you probably see we have a travel trailer. So we go camping a lot. We try to break away. So I'm the guy who's trying to drive us to, like, hey, we got to be there by noon because we got to get to this thing by 1 o'clock. And then by 2:30 we're doing this. And my wife's like, stop. Let's just go and sit and drink a beer and watch the kids play outside. So we got to balance that a little bit. Like, I'm always trying to go see things, and she's just, trying to go and relax. So, but getting away and trying to make the most of this military lifestyle. So good or bad, our kids are in their 5th school district in 5 years. We've moved every summer for 5 consecutive years. And we like to tell people we're making memories for these guys, right? Whether they know it or appreciate it or not, maybe someday they'll look back and be excited about it. So we're looking for those opportunities every chance we get to take advantage of the fact that who knows where we're going to live next summer. So we might as well make the most out of what we have this summer.
Yeah. I think it develops character, right? And even though it's not always pleasant in the time, I mean, lifting weights isn't pleasant, right? But it's breaking down muscle, and then we build back that muscle stronger than it was before. And my kids have experienced similar. My oldest is 21, and she experienced that military life a little bit, although she was really young at the beginning of it. But then I started as a police officer in Seattle, and then moved over to Eastern Washington, and then even a couple of residences within the city just because of different circumstances. Yeah, my kids kind of got sick of being the new kid in school, and they're like, "Oh, Dad, really again?" But now I see them as being, especially my oldest too, being very social and able to engage pretty much anyone in any circumstance.
That's great.
Yeah. So, hey, you said something else there that just kind of rung true for me. As I promoted into supervisory roles, I had some mentors of mine warn me, give me a heads up, whatever the right word is. Hey, Chris, sometimes supervision, sometimes leadership is lonely. Because you used to have this circle of people that you could engage in. And as you become the boss, and as you become the boss's boss and further up, your circles get smaller and smaller of who you can really confide in, just because of the appropriateness of, whatever it is that you want to discuss. Is it different in the military because of the fact that, I mean, you're pretty much PCS, and every time you promote, you're not staying in the exact same circle, or have you found the same thing to be true, that as you've promoted, not that you're lonely, maybe that's too strong of a word, but just that recognition that there's not a whole lot of folks that you get to talk to anymore?
No, it's absolutely true. And I don't know that PCS necessarily changes that. It's the names of the people that you're around all the time change because you're moving different bases, but the roles don't change. And the rank structure is still there, right? It's a pyramid, right? There's a lot more junior ranking guys in the bottom than there are senior ranking guys in the top. And when you make either a bad leadership decision that affects all those people below you, or B, you make an unpopular leadership decision, one, you can't go to them and cry on their shoulder, right, for your mistake, or for they don't like me today or whatever, right? And so you're looking to the folks that are at your peer level, and the farther you go, the more challenging it gets. And we always joke about, and I'm sure there's some similar thing on your side of things in the world, but as people promote, and especially when they promote in like being, squadron commanders or chief master sergeants, you always tell them like, hey, guess what? You're now part of them. Remember, they made a bad decision. They're the ones making me do this horrible thing. Well, guess who they is now? It's you. So everyone still has a they, right? I still have a they. You still have a they, but they're just different people now, higher up. But make no mistake about it. When you reach a certain level, you become them, and you become they, and you need to be accountable there for all the decisions you make, good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. That's a challenge for sure. And finding that it's hard to find the persons that you can lean on. And that, again, I come back to the discussion about family earlier, right? Like that's what family's so incredibly important, right? If I make a bad decision today as a colonel, I might be able to talk to my boss about it. One of the other colonels who's has to be my boss, right? But my scope of folks is pretty limited. And if I made a bad decision that affected not only my airman but also him, because he's the boss, and now he's got to answer for my terrible decision, who am I going to talk to, right? I can go talk to my wife and maybe complain to her. But yeah, that is a challenge. I think I'm guessing it's probably a challenge in almost any occupation, if you will.
Yeah. So did you say that you're allowed to serve for 30 years as an officer? Is that what I heard you say earlier?
Generally speaking, yeah, 30 years as a commissioned officer. If you make 06, I mean, colonel, it goes to 30. Lieutenant colonel, somewhere less, I think maybe 24. And excuse me, I apologize. Those folks who make general officer, there's some different rules entirely for them. It goes beyond 30, and it's literally in the hands of Congress at that point. So,
okay, all right. Because my next question is what's next? But you
Ooh.
probably don't know what's next, right? I mean, that's the reality of
Man.
being a senior officer in the military is that they're going to tell you what's next.
Yeah, but so here's the thing. Yes, that's kind of the part of being in the military is, you know, they kind of just tell you what's next. But I've kind of reached the point where there's nowhere else for me to go. The likelihood that I'll ever be a general officer is, I mean, it's infinitesimal percentages, right? I mean, it's nowhere in my 5-year plan, if you will, that I'll ever be a general officer. As a career field, the security force career field. So I still hold the security forces AFSC, excuse me. But you know, we've got 650 officers or so. There's one general. We get one 1-star. And if you're not that guy, you're not that guy, and I'm not that guy. So yeah. So what's next? I don't know. So this current assignment I'm in is it's a 2-year assignment, and so unless I get myself removed in some way, we'll be here at least through the summer of 23. I'm beyond 20 years, so I'm retirement eligible in that regard. But because I promoted and took some assignments, the game doesn't work out where I can just retire whenever I want. I got to wait for some opportunities to retire. I might be able to retire in the summer of 23. Probably more likely I'll have to take an assignment out of here, and then wherever that ends up taking us, and we'll make a decision there. But I can't imagine there being more than one more assignment for me. You know, my oldest is going to be, she's a 6th grader now. She'll be a 7th grader here next year. We've always said we want to be done moving before she hits high school, or when she hits high school, if you will. So she doesn't have, once she's in high school, we don't want her to ever change schools again. Yeah. So if wherever we're at, when she hits high school, if it's still something I enjoy doing and the Air Force isn't going to force me to go anywhere, we'll sit and we'll continue to serve and let her get into high school. But our kids, the way they're stacked up, there's no logical break after that. So once we ever get her in high school, we're done, because we'll have to get all the way through school for all these kids. And I think it's the least we could owe them is let them have a solid high school experience after. Again, my 6th grader is literally in her 6th school. She's done kindergarten, 1st grade in one school, and she's done every year since in a different school district, in a different state, a different town. So the question is, what do I do when I retire? And I have no idea. I always tell people I know what I don't want to do, and that's what I'm doing now. And that's not a poke at my current job. I say that at every job. I mean, like, I know what I want to do. What I'm doing right now. I have no idea, and I have labored over this, and I drive my wife insane with this. Like, hey, what if I were to go do this? Or what if I went back to school for this? She's just tired of talking about it. She's like, just pick something. Just let me know when you decide. So, I don't know.
Well, I think you deserved it, Colonel. I think at this point, whatever the heck you and your wife want to do, go do it and just rock it and
I appreciate that
and enjoy it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you so much for giving me your time. I know that this was a little bit of work on the back end, making sure that it was kosher, and then especially when you have 3 lovely ladies, 4 including your wife, time is precious. And so thank you for giving me a piece of your time.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk and just catch up. And it's like 20 years, like literally 20 years, right? So it's really cool just to see you again and talk with you. That's not just a Facebook text here and there. So, and to you, man, what a cool thing. Just like, you know, you troll my Facebook page. I've trolled your Facebook page, and I do a lot of watching people on Facebook. I don't do a lot of posting, but man, this right here, this podcast, the stuff you do with your wife, the lovely kids that you've grown, this is just congratulations to you, man. It makes me proud to look back on a former troop. And I'm gonna say this too, we kind of talked about this a minute ago, but I'll come back on it. You asked me about as a lieutenant, how do your senior NCOs shape you? I will tell you that as an officer, what I've learned is that every one of my troops shapes me. And I'll tell you, as an E4, I almost always remember you on the desk, by the way. When I think of Crystal Trail, you're on the desk. As an E4 sitting at the law enforcement desk, you're shaping an officer. And so I don't know if you know, if you're people in your audience out there that are listening, if they're still serving or they're a junior in some way, or probably not even in the military, probably in other walks of life even. I would just say don't think that just because you're lower down in the totem pole, if you will, that your influence does not matter on the people above you, because it's informative for those guys, whether they even realize it or not. But yeah, I'm proud of you, and congratulations to you as well for just what a wonderful life lives. It's awesome.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate you.
Cool.
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, what a humbling experience. This experience of producing a podcast has just been remarkable. It gives me an excuse. We shouldn't need an excuse, should we? But it gives me an excuse to think about these people that have impacted my life in significant ways, and to reach out to them and start a conversation, and then to produce it so that others can benefit from it as well. I hope you grabbed some great takeaways in life and in leadership from Colonel Sheffield. Hey, I want to hear from you. Jamie and I are constantly trying to make this better. There's a few different ways you can communicate with us. If you're consuming this on Amazon, on Spotify, or actually I messed that up, not on Amazon. If you're consuming this on Apple podcast platform, on Spotify, on Facebook, you can still rate and review us. If you think we deserve it, we'd really appreciate a 5-star rating. That increases our viewability on those podcast platforms. You can also shoot us an email at chris@gravityct.com. Let us know how we're doing. Let us know how we can make it better. Maybe give us ideas of future guests or Marriage Monday topics. Ladies and gentlemen, you hear me say it before, and I'm going to say it again. We only get to live this life once, right? So let's go out and do it well. Let's love on the people in our circles. Take care of each other. God bless.